Hey, welcome back to the Bootcamp series. In this video, we're going to learn about something called Node.js. What in the world is Node? Well, imagine there was this environment where we could speak the JavaScript language, but we weren't limited to just being inside a web browser doing web browserish things. Right? So Node is this environment where we write JavaScript, but we can do sort of general purpose computer programming things like interact with the file system, right? We can read the contents of files on our hard drive. We can create new files on our hard drive programmatically with Node. So with that in mind, you can imagine that we can use Node to automate all sorts of different tasks for us. Also, Node can not only make outgoing network requests, but it can listen ongoing for incoming requests. So you can imagine that we can use Node to set up a web server. Big picture, Node essentially makes it possible to do anything with JavaScript. But let's not get ahead of ourselves in this video. We're not going to be setting up a server or any sort of advanced automation in this video. In this video, we just want to get Node installed on our computer, see how to run a little bit of Node code, and just the essentials to get up and running. Without further ado, let's jump into that action. Okay, so first we need to install Node on our computer. So you can just visit the official website. It's nodejs.org. Towards the bottom of the homepage, you'll usually see two download links. So the one on the left is the long-term support version, and the one on the right is the newest or latest version. Now, if you're watching this video in the future, the exact version numbers will be different, but that really doesn't matter. You can download either one. If we were setting up a server instead of just installing Node on our computer, I'd probably recommend the long-term support version. But since we don't need the absolute best possible stability, and we're just installing it on our personal computer right now, you might as well go with the newest or latest version. But either way, you can't go wrong. So right now, go ahead and pause the video and download and install this file. All of the default options are okay, so you should be able to just click Next, Next, Next. Okay, now once you've completed the installation and you come back and resume this video, we'll want to test to make sure that you installed it successfully. So to do that, we just want to jump into a command line. Now, if you're already a bit experienced with computers and programming, you'll know how to find your own command line, but if you're new to this whole programming world, this is one of the reasons I recommended the Visual Studio Code as our text editor, and that's because it has a built-in command line. So in VS Code, you can just click the View menu and then choose the Terminal. So that's going to open up your command line at the bottom of VS Code. Also, there's a keyboard shortcut for this. So on Windows, you can press Control-J, or on Mac, you can press Command-J. And that will toggle and open and close the command line. Okay, now if you click into the command line, we just want to run this command. Node, and then a space, and then -v. If we press enter, you hopefully should see some sort of version number, right? So it's going to tell you which version of Node you have installed. And again, if you're watching this in the future, your version number does not need to match mine. As long as you see any sort of version number here, you're good to go. You have successfully installed Node. If instead you see something like command not found or unknown command, you might just need to restart your computer or completely close out your text editor and reopen it. But the question now is, once we have Node installed, what can we do with it? Well, check this out. In the command line, if we just run the command of node and nothing else, just node and press enter, well, that enters us into this interactive Node environment. So now when we type commands here, we're no longer typing operating system commands. We're now in the world of Node, and we can think of this as just a place where we can type JavaScript, almost similar to when we're in the console in our web browser. So we could type 2 + 2. Press enter, we get 4. Or we could create a variable in memory. Say, let my name equal string of text. Now we can access that again, say my name. It returns the value. And this is just regular JavaScript. So we could say my name, and then all strings have a method of 2 uppercase, parentheses to call it, You get the idea. So this is just a JavaScript environment. However, up until this point in this bootcamp series, we've been using JavaScript in a web browser. And we've learned that you can select different content on the web page by using the document object. However, in Node, if we say document and press enter, we see uncaught reference error, document is not defined. Also in the web browser, we know we can have an annoying alert pop up by calling alert. But in the world of Node, again, that does not exist. So we can think of Node as sort of the JavaScript environment of the web browser, but all of the things that are specifically related to the web browser have been stripped out. And instead, we have new functionality that's specific to Node. For example, Node can read files from our hard drive and create new files on our hard drive. Right? And Node can not only make outgoing network requests, but it can listen ongoing for incoming network requests. So both the web browser and Node both speak the JavaScript language, but they each have their own unique superpowers that the other doesn't have. But the beautiful part is that the core of the JavaScript language itself, that never changes, and that's still available to us. Right? So everything we've learned about objects or arrays or variables or scope or functions, everything is still exactly the same here in Node. And this is great. However, we don't want to be limited to just typing in single commands one at a time here. So to get out of this interactive Node mode in the command line, you can just press Control-C twice on your keyboard. Or if I go back into Node, you can also exit this mode by typing .exit. Press enter, and that will also remove you from the interactive Node mode. Okay, but the point is, instead of just running individual commands one by one like that, we probably want to write a JavaScript file with as many lines of code as we want, and then tell Node to execute that file. So let's try that right now. I want you to create an empty folder somewhere on your computer. So I'm just going to create a new folder on my desktop. You could create it anywhere, but I'll name it Node Test. The name doesn't matter, but then go ahead and open this folder in VS Code. Okay, so when you open an entire folder in VS Code, now in the left-hand sidebar, we can create a new file. We can name it anything, but I'll name it maybe test.js. So we could say, let my favorite number equal 10. And then on a new line of code, we could say console.log my favorite number, maybe +1, just as a test, right? So we would expect to see 11 in the console. So you can save this file. The point is you can write as much JavaScript as you want. You can do very complex things in JavaScript. That's just a quick example. But now we would want Node to actually run or execute this. So in the command line, again, that's Control-J or Command-J to open up or to toggle the command line. You just say Node and then a space, and then you point towards the name of your file. So I named mine test.js. You actually don't even need to include the file extension. So you can say .js, or you can just say the name of the file without the .js. Press enter. Cool, and there we see console.log 11. At this point, I want to show you a very important feature in Node, and that is importing or loading or requiring in a separate JavaScript file within the file we're currently in. So for example, let's imagine we want to have a function that triples any number you give it. Now, yes, we could write that in one line of code, but imagine instead it was super complex and it required hundreds of lines of code, and we didn't want to make this file messy. Instead, we wanted to have a separate file where all of the logic for that triple function can live. That way our main JavaScript file stays clean and organized. So, for example, we could create a separate file in our folder. You can name it anything, but maybe I'll name it tripleme.js. Okay, so in this file I would say function tripleme parentheses curly brackets. In the parentheses, let's have one parameter to receive the incoming number, and then inside the body of the function, let's just return that incoming number asterisk or multiply by 3. Okay, now that's the function, but then at the very bottom of this file, below the end of our function, we do want to say module.exports equals whatever we want this file to export. So we would just point towards our triple me function. So triple me. Now we're not calling the function here, so we don't want parentheses here. We're not trying to execute it right here and there. We're just exporting the function itself so that a different file can import this and use it whenever and wherever it sees fit. So if we save this file, now back in our main file, up at the very top, we can say const triple me equals, and then Node has this function called require, and in the parentheses, you just point towards that file. So we give it a string of text. In Node, you can say // to look in the current directory or folder that we're already in, and then the file name, so triple me. You can include the .js if you want to, but you don't need to. Okay, so now this, the variable, this is going to be whatever that file exported, which is the function. So we can get rid of my favorite number, and then in console.log, we can just say, right in here, maybe call our triple me function and give it a value of 10. So if we save this and run it, we would expect to see a value of 30. So down in our command line, if we say node test, perfect. Now, in addition to importing our own files that we ourselves created, we can also load in or import modules that exist in the core of Node itself, right? Sort of built-in features that Node offers. Perhaps the most famous of these is something called file system. And this is what lets Node read files on our hard drive or create brand new files on our hard drive, so on and so forth. So to begin using this, we can just say const fs for file system. Technically, you can make up any variable name you want here, but just so it makes sense, you can say fs equals require. And now, instead of a path pointing towards a file in our folder, we just say fs. That's it. Node will know what this means. Fs is a built-in module in the core of Node, and now we have access to it within this file from this fs variable. Now, you can learn more about the different modules that the core of Node offers and the different functions that they all have by going to the Node documentation. So, for example, here I am on the Node documentation for the fs module. Now, reading through this documentation is not very exciting, and unless you have a specific task in mind, it's not very useful. However, let me walk you through a quick example. So let's imagine we want to use the file system module to read the contents of a file in our folder and then slightly modify it and then output it in a brand new dynamically created file. So here's an example. Let's create a brand new file really quick in our folder. Let's name it, we could name it anything, but maybe content.txt. Okay, now inside this new empty file, let's say the sky is blue. Let's go ahead and save that. Now, back in our test.js file, imagine we want to use the Node file system module to read the contents of our new txt file and then maybe wrap it in an HTML heading level 1 tag and then export that as a new file in our folder, and perhaps we can name it index.html. So here's how we can do that. Down here, let's start using the fs variable or the fs module. So fs, and then we can look inside it with a dot, and it has a function named readFile. When we call it inside these parentheses, we want to give it 3 arguments. So a, b, c for placeholders. The first argument is the file that we want to read. So let's just give it a string of text and point towards that. We named it content.txt file. So // to look in the current directory, and then just content.txt. Okay, the second argument, so instead of this b placeholder, this is the encoding type of the file. So we can just give it a string of text and say UTF-8. Okay, and then this third argument is a function that we want to run once Node has actually successfully read the contents of this file. Right? We don't know how long that's going to take. It could take 1 millisecond, or if the computer and hard drive is super slow, maybe it takes a second or two. We don't know. But when it actually does complete, only then will the function we have here actually run. So instead of C, let's say function, parentheses, curly brackets. Now in these parentheses, we want to have two parameters. We can make up any names for the parameters, but just so it makes sense, why don't we say ERR for error, and the second one can be data. Okay, inside the body of our function here, let's say if there is an error, throw the error so we can see it in the console. If there is no error, then what do we actually want to do? Well, data is going to contain the contents of this file that we just read. Right? That's what we named this second parameter. So just as a quick test, if we say console.log data, give that a save. And now if we run this in the command line down here, node test, awesome, there we see the sky is blue. So we were able to successfully read the contents of that file. Now let's practice writing and creating a brand new file. So imagine we want to create a file in our folder called index.html, and we just want to take the content of this file and maybe wrap it in a heading level 1 tag. So to do that, instead of console.log data here, let's get rid of that. And let's use the fs module again. So fs dot, and look inside it for a function named writeFile. Parentheses to call it, and again we're going to give it 3 arguments. So a, comma b, comma c. The first argument is the name of the file that we want to create. So string of text, dot slash, just in the current directory. Let's name it index.html. The second argument, instead of this b placeholder, is the string of text that we want to be in this new file. So instead of a basic pair of quotes, let's actually use backticks so we can do something dynamic. So let's just have a heading level 1 opening and closing tag, and then in between them, that's where we'd want the actual content that we read. So that's just $ curly brackets to do something dynamic, and then say data. Okay, and then this third argument, again, this is a function that will run only once this task of creating the file has actually completed. So we can just say function, parentheses, curly brackets. You can check for an error, so we can include that as a parameter. Inside the body of the function, we can say if there is an error, throw it so we can read it in the console. But if there is no error, let's just log to the console and say file was successfully created. Okay, let's save this and test it out. So back in the command line, let me open up my file explorer too so we can see if the file gets created. If we say node test, press enter, we see, cool, file was successfully created, and over in the file tree, we see index.html. That was programmatically created by Node, and if we open it up, perfect. We successfully read the contents of one file and then output it into this new file. Now, if I jump back into our main test.js file, I do want to point out that FS or file system is just one of the many features built into the core of Node. So for example, in the Node documentation here, we see file system, but we also see events and HTTP and path, so on and so forth. However, I want to let you in on a little secret. Well, it's not really a secret, but I would say 95 times out of 100 in the real world, there's really no need for you and I to manually research and use these core components of Node. I'm not saying we'll never need to do that, but just that most of the time it's not necessary. Because instead, we're usually just going to use a community-created package that uses the right Node code for us at the right moments. Let me explain what I mean. So in our previous video, we learned about React, and we know that if we want to be able to automatically transpile our React JSX into traditional JavaScript, we need Node on our computer. However, you and I don't need to manually write all of the Node code that reads the contents of one file and then creates a new file. Instead, there's this industry standard package called Webpack. And you can see that just in the last week alone, it's been downloaded over 12 million times. Or for a different example, in the next chapter of this bootcamp series, when we learn about servers, we're not going to write all of the Node code ourselves that listens for incoming connections, so on and so forth. Instead, we're just going to leverage this industry standard package named Express. And you can see just in the last week, it has over 14 million downloads. And for yet another example, when it comes time for us to connect a database to our server, again, we're not going to write the code that micromanages the connection to a database. Instead, we're just going to use a package such as this MongoDB package. If we want to use MongoDB, it has 2 million weekly downloads. Or perhaps we'd use this MySQL package if we want to use a MySQL database. You get the idea. Depending on what we need to do, there's probably already an industry standard package that does exactly that. So yes, the creators and authors of these packages need to research and write Node code, but oftentimes in the real world, you and I really don't need to. Now yes, there will be times when these packages don't do exactly what we need them to do, and in those situations, that's when you can go to the Node documentation, perform your own research on the task you need to do, and roll up your sleeves and make it happen. But like I said before, I would say 9 times out of 10, that's not necessary, and these packages will do the trick for us. So big picture, what I'm trying to say is that learning Node itself is not a bad idea. It's just something that I wouldn't do preemptively. When you run into a situation where you really need a custom solution, maybe you can write the Node code yourself. Anyways, having said all of that, at this point you might be wondering, what is this website I'm looking at that has all of these different packages? Well, this is a website called NPM, which stands for Node Package Manager. And what's cool is, yes, we can come to this website and search for packages and read about them, but when we actually want to use and download a package, we can just go to our command line. Because when we installed Node on our computers, it also installed a command called npm. So right now I want you to do this with me. In VS Code, in your command line, go ahead and type in npm and then a space, init, and then a space, -y. Go ahead and press enter. Now what did that just do? Well, first of all, you only need to run that command when you're first starting a new project, right? So a new folder on your computer. For each separate project, we just run that command once in the beginning, and it creates this file for us named package.json. Now, this file is essentially a grocery list that keeps track of any packages and ingredients our project needs. So, for example, if I go back to the NPM website, we're not going to install Webpack or Express or MongoDB or any of those things in this video, because this video should be relatively short and it's just about Node and NPM, not about any of these actual packages. But just for a quick example, maybe we want to install this package called validator. So you can give it a string of text and then you can ask, is this string of text an email address? And then it will return either true or false. Or you can give it a string of text and say, is this text alphanumeric, meaning does it only contain letters and numbers and no other strange characters? And it will return either true or false. So it's just a little helper or utility library. But just for a quick example, let's try to download it and install it into our project. So we take note of its name, it's validator. So in our command line, now that we've created our grocery list or our package.json file, if we just say npm install, and then the name of the package is validator, push enter. Cool, now that just did 2 things. So first of all, if you look in your package.json file, down towards the bottom we see this dependencies property, and it's going to keep a list of any packages we install. So there's validator, we just added that. So that's the first thing that command did. But secondly, you'll notice this new Node modules folder, and NPM automatically went out onto the internet and downloaded any of the files that we need for that package. Okay, so now the question becomes, how do we actually use that package in our code? So to test it out, we can just go into our main test.js file that we were working in earlier. And up at the very top, first we want to import or require in that package. So we can just say const, you could name it anything, but let's say validator equals require. Again, we give require a string of text, and you just include the NPM package name. So validator, and that's all we need to do. Node is smart enough to know where to look. It will look within our Node modules folder, the downloaded files, and it will pull in that package or that module. So now just as a quick test down here, we could try to use that package. We can say console.log, and then let's log out validator.isEmail. So we're calling this method. And if you give it a string of text, if we just say John, this should return a value of false, right? This is not a valid email address. So if we save this and then run this file, so in our command line node test or whatever you named your file, cool, there we see false. However, if we change this to john@test.com, so this is a valid email address, hit save, run it again, node test, now we see true. So it's that easy to use NPM to download a package and then use it in your Node file. Really quick, I do want to show you why the package.json file is so important and so valuable. So for example, if I deleted my Node modules folder, right, that's the folder that contains all of the downloaded files for the packages we want. So if I delete that, it's not a big deal because we still have our package.json file, which lists out any and all dependencies. Now, yes, we only have the one validator, but imagine if we had 50 or 100 different dependencies for a project. Well, as long as you still have your package.json file, you can just say in the command line, npm install, and that's it. You don't have to hit space and then list out a package name. Just npm install, push enter, will look at your package.json dependencies and go out and automatically download all of them. Now, for some reason, I'm not seeing the Node modules folder recreated here. I think that's just a VS Code bug. So if I click this reload icon here, cool. Yep, you can see there's the Node modules folder created again for us by the npm command. So just that one npm install will go out and re-download any and all dependencies you have, no matter how many there are. And now we can run our code again, node test, and it still works. It is still able to pull in that downloaded validator package. The reason I wanted to show you that is because in the industry, oftentimes when a coworker sends you a Git repo or the files for a project, there will not be a Node modules folder to start out with. Instead though, as long as they give you a package.json file, that's okay. You just run the npm install command and then you will have all of the files you need. Anyways, that brings us to the end of the technical aspect of this video. So where do we go from here? Well, now that we know the very basics of Node and we have it installed on our computers, let's get back to what we wanted to do at the very end of our previous video. So remember we were working with React and the JSX syntax, and we needed some sort of automated way to transpile the JSX into traditional JavaScript. Well, we can absolutely use Node to do that, and that's exactly what we're going to set up in our next video. We're going to use an industry standard package named Webpack. Should be a lot of fun. If you're enjoying this bootcamp series so far, as always, I'd appreciate it if you share the link with your friends and family. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.